Admiral Kethavar had commanded fleets across 17 star systems, conquered worlds whose names were whispered in fear throughout the galaxy, and personally executed more than 1,000 prisoners of war. Fear was not something the towering Zephyrian understood. His species had evolved from apex predators on a death world, where even the plants could kill you in your sleep. Standing nearly 9 feet tall with forearms ending in razor-sharp claws, Kethavar was the embodiment of everything that made lesser species tremble. The War Council chamber aboard his flagship buzzed with the excited chatter of his officers. Today marked a historic moment for the Galactic Dominion. After 3 years of careful planning and preparation, they were finally ready to begin the systematic conquest of the Sol system and its primitive inhabitants. "Report on the human defenses," Kethavar commanded, his voice a deep rumble that silenced the room instantly. General Vexthol, a 6-armed insectoid from the Hive worlds, stepped forward with a data tablet clutched in his mandibles.
"My lord, our intelligence gathering has been thorough."
The humans possess only basic spaceflight capabilities. Their fastest vessels cannot exceed 1/10 light speed, and their weapons technology is laughably primitive. They still use kinetic projectiles and crude missiles. A ripple of amused clicks and chirps ran through the assembled officers. Kethavar raised one of his 4 hands for silence. "Continue." "They have approximately 200 vessels of military grade scattered across their system, mostly concentrated around their home world and a few mining colonies. No energy shields, no particle beam weapons, no quantum torpedoes. They appear to be at roughly the same technological level as the Keltorians were when we conquered them 500 years ago." Commander Rikstal, a reptilian saurian with venomous fangs, hissed his approval. "This will be over before it begins. Why did the High Command even assign our full battle fleet for this? A single destroyer could handle their entire navy." Kethavar studied the holographic display showing the human star system. Something nagged at him, though he couldn't identify what. In his 3 centuries of military service, he had learned to trust his instincts. They had kept him alive through countless battles and earned him his current position as Supreme Admiral of the Dominion's eastern fleets. "What about their ground forces?" he asked. Vexthol consulted his tablet again. "Approximately 8 billion humans divided among several nation-states. They still engage in primitive warfare among themselves using chemical explosives and projectile weapons. No energy weapons, no powered armor, no genetic enhancement programs. Their soldiers are unmodified baseline biologicals." The laughter in the room grew louder. Even Kethavar found himself amused by the absurdity of it. Unmodified biologicals? The last time the Dominion had faced such primitive opponents was during the earliest days of galactic expansion. "Over a millennium ago, sir," interrupted Navigator Yindal, a graceful aquatic being from the deep worlds. "I should mention that our long-range sensors detected some unusual readings from the human system during our approach." The laughter died. Kethavar's 4 eyes focused intently on the Navigator. "Explain." "Massive electromagnetic signatures emanating from their home world and several orbital installations. The pattern is unlike anything in our databases. It's possible they have developed some form of technology we haven't encountered before." General Vexthol made a dismissive gesture with 2 of his arms. "Probably just their primitive nuclear power systems. These species always generate excessive electromagnetic noise before they learn proper energy management." Kethavar wasn't convinced, but he had no concrete reason to delay the operation. The High Command had been clear about their expectations. The Sol system possessed valuable resources and a strategic location that would serve as a perfect staging ground for further expansion into the Outer Rim territories. Moreover, the humans had recently made contact with the Confederation of Free Worlds, the Dominion's primary rival. Allowing them time to form an alliance was unacceptable. "Very well," Kethavar announced, moving to the command console at the center of the chamber. "We proceed as planned. Fleet Formation Alpha 7. The human world will be given one opportunity to surrender. If they refuse, we initiate orbital bombardment of their major population centers until compliance is achieved." The officers snapped to attention and began filing out to assume their positions. Within an hour, the mighty Dominion fleet began its final approach toward Earth. 500 warships, including 3 massive dreadnoughts, advanced in perfect formation through the void. It was overwhelming force by any reasonable standard. As they drew closer to the human system, Kethavar found himself spending more time than usual on the bridge, watching the long-range displays with growing unease. The electromagnetic readings Yindal had mentioned were becoming stronger and more complex. Whatever the humans were doing, they were doing a lot of it. "Sir," called Communications Officer Zareth, "we're receiving a transmission from the human world. It appears to be a response to our standard surrender demand." "Audio only," Kethvar commanded. The voice that emerged from the speakers was distinctly human, speaking the common galactic trade language with a slight accent. It belonged to a female, which surprised some of the officers, since many species restricted military command to their dominant gender. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Earth Defense Force. Your demand for unconditional surrender has been reviewed by our governments and militaries. Our response is simple: no. We will defend our home and our people with everything we have. If you want our world, you'll have to take it." The transmission ended. Several officers began laughing again, but Kethvar noticed something in the human's tone that gave him pause. There had been no fear in her voice, no desperation or pleading, just calm, cold determination. "Interesting," he murmured to himself. "Sir?" asked Vexthul. "Nothing. Signal the fleet to assume attack formation. Begin with targeted strikes on their military installations. We'll see how long their resolve lasts when their defenses start burning." But as the Dominion fleet moved into position and prepared to demonstrate the futility of resistance, Admiral Kethvar couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. In all his years of conquest, he had never encountered a species that faced certain annihilation with such apparent composure. He was about to learn that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their numbers. It was something far more dangerous, something that would haunt his nightmares for the rest of his very long life. He was about to discover what it meant when an entire species decided that some things were worth dying for, and that death was preferable to surrender. The first human ship appeared on their sensors like a ghost materializing from nothing. One moment the space ahead was empty, the next moment a sleek vessel unlike anything in the Dominion databases was accelerating toward their formation at impossible speed. "Contact bearing 27 Mark IV, reported sensor operator Tilmar, his crystalline fingers dancing over his console. "Single vessel, unknown configuration. Speed is—" "That can't be right." Kethvar moved to the sensor station, his massive frame casting a shadow over the smaller officer. "What's the reading?" "Sir, if these numbers are accurate, that ship is traveling at 0.8 light speed, without warp drive signatures. That's impossible according to every physics model we know." A chill ran down Kethvar's spine, though he didn't let it show. 0.8 light speed in normal space should have torn any known vessel apart from the gravitational stress alone. Weapons status on the contact? Unknown energy signatures building along its hull. Whatever they're charging, it's drawing more power than our main batteries. The human vessel was still accelerating. At its current rate of approach, it would reach the Dominion formation in less than 3 minutes. Kethvar had never seen anything move so fast outside of warp space. "All vessels, combat formation. Prepare to engage," he commanded into the fleet communications channel. The response from his fleet commanders was immediate and professional, but Kethvar could hear the uncertainty in their voices. They were facing something new, something that challenged everything they thought they knew about space warfare. The human ship was close enough now for visual identification. It was beautiful in a deadly way, all smooth curves and aggressive angles. Unlike the crude, bulky vessels they had expected, this looked like it had been designed by artists who understood both aesthetics and lethality. "Incoming. Transmission from the human vessel," announced Zareth on screen. The face that appeared was definitely human, but not what any of them had expected. The being looked young, almost childlike by Dominion standards, with short-cropped dark hair and bright blue eyes that seemed to sparkle with something that wasn't quite sane. When she spoke, her voice carried an enthusiasm that was deeply unsettling. "Hello there, space friends. I'm Captain Jessica Torres of the UEF Defiant. I wanted to personally welcome you to our solar system and let you know that we've prepared some very special hospitality for your visit." Several of Kethvar's officers exchanged glances. The human was speaking as if this were a social gathering rather than a military engagement. "Now, I know what you're thinking." Torres continued with a grin that revealed perfectly white teeth. "You're probably wondering why we're not running away screaming like good little primitives. Well, the thing is, we humans have this really bad habit. When someone threatens our families, our homes, our children, we tend to get a bit upset about it." The transmission cut to external cameras showing the human vessel. What happened next defied every principle of space combat that the Dominion had developed over 1,000 years of warfare. The human ship didn't slow down. Instead, it accelerated even more, passing .9 light speed as it dove straight into the center of the Dominion formation. Energy began building along weapons ports that shouldn't have been able to exist at such velocities. All ships evasive maneuvers. Kethvar roared. It was too late. The human vessel unleashed its weapons at point-blank range, and what emerged wasn't energy beams or plasma bolts. It was something that made the universe itself scream. The space around the Defiant warped and twisted as it fired what could only be described as weaponized gravity. The laws of physics bent and broke as artificial singularities bloomed like deadly flowers throughout the Dominion formation. 3 cruisers were crushed instantly, compressed into dense balls of metal and flesh before they even had time to register what was happening. The human ship spun through the chaos like a dancer, its impossible acceleration allowing it to avoid return fire that would have vaporized any normal vessel. As it moved, it continued to fire, each shot opening new wounds in reality itself. Status report. Kethvar demanded as his flagship shook from a near miss. 16 vessels destroyed, 23 damaged, Tilmar reported, his voice high with disbelief. Sir, this is impossible. A single ship can't do this kind of damage to an entire fleet. But it was happening. The human vessel was tearing through their formation like a predator among prey, and the most terrifying part wasn't its weapons or its speed. It was the laughter coming over the open communications channel. Captain Torres was laughing. Not the maniacal cackle of madness, but the genuine joy of someone doing exactly what they loved. She was enjoying this. Come on, guys. Her voice crackled through the static. Is that all you've got? I thought the mighty galactic Dominion would put up more of a fight. Kethvar felt something he had never experienced before. A cold creeping sensation that started in his stomach and spread outward. It took him several moments to identify what he was feeling, because no Zephyrian had felt it for so long that they had almost forgotten the word existed in their language. Fear. The Defiant completed its attack run and began to pull away, having destroyed nearly a quarter of his fleet in less than 5 minutes. But as it retreated, Kethvar's sensors detected something that made his blood turn to ice. More contacts were appearing. Dozens of them, all moving at the same impossible speeds, all broadcasting the same energy signatures. Sir, Tilmar whispered, there are 47 more human vessels approaching from different vectors. They'll be in weapons range in 6 minutes. Kethvar stared at the tactical display in growing horror. Each new contact was as fast and apparently as heavily armed as the Defiant. His fleet of 500 warships was about to face 48 human vessels that individually outclassed anything the Dominion had ever built. Sir, General Vexthul approached hesitantly. Orders? For the first time in his military career, Admiral Kethvar found himself without an answer. Everything they thought they knew about humanity was wrong. Everything they thought they knew about warfare was wrong. These weren't primitive beings with crude weapons and slow ships. These were apex predators who had learned to weaponize the fundamental forces of the universe itself. And they were coming for his fleet. With the enthusiasm of children at play, the laughter continued to echo through space as more human ships appeared, each one a beautiful, impossible engine of destruction. And for the first time since he was a young officer, Kethvar began to understand what his prey had felt in those final moments before he had destroyed them. He was beginning to understand fear. The human fleet hit them like a storm of metal and fury. What should have been a coordinated battle became a nightmare of twisted physics and impossible maneuvers. Kethvar watched in growing horror as his carefully organized formation disintegrated under an assault that made no sense. According to everything the Dominion knew about space, warfare, the human ships moved like living things, flowing around obstacles and changing direction in ways that should have liquefied their crews from the gravitational forces involved. They fired weapons that bent spacetime, created localized black holes, and somehow managed to accelerate matter beyond the speed of light in controlled bursts. Sir, the dreadnought Eternal Victory is reporting massive structural damage, Communications Officer Zareth announced, his normally calm demeanor cracking. They're requesting permission to withdraw. Kethvar felt his 4 hearts hammering against his chest. The Eternal Victory was the pride of the Dominion fleet, a vessel 3 kilometers long with enough firepower to level a planet. It had never retreated from any battle in its 200-year service record. Denied. All ships maintain formation and return fire. But even as he gave the order, Kethavar knew it was hopeless. His ships were firing at targets that moved faster than their targeting computers could track. Their energy beams and plasma torpedoes seemed to pass harmlessly through space where the human ships had been microseconds before. Meanwhile, the human weapons struck with devastating precision. Another cruiser imploded as a gravity weapon compressed it into a sphere of twisted metal. A destroyer simply vanished as something that looked like liquid starlight engulfed it completely. Admiral. General Vexathul approached with his insectoid features pale with fear. Perhaps we should consider a tactical withdrawal. We can regroup and develop new strategies to counter their technology. The suggestion was logical, but it hit Kethavar like a physical blow. In 3 centuries of military service, he had never retreated from an enemy. Never. The word didn't exist in his vocabulary. A new voice crackled over the communications channel. Different from Captain Torres, but carrying the same unsettling enthusiasm. Attention Dominion Fleet. This is Commander Marcus Rodriguez aboard the UEF Retribution. I wanted to thank you personally for this opportunity. The voice paused, and in the background, Kethavar could hear what sounded like music. Human music, with a driving rhythm that somehow matched the deadly dance of their ships. You see, we've been preparing for this moment for a very long time. Ever since our deep space monitoring stations detected your Empire's expansion pattern, we've been working very hard to give you the welcome you deserve. On the tactical display, the Retribution was visible as it carved through a squadron of Dominion fighters like a blade through silk. Its weapons fired in perfect synchronization with the music, turning destruction into art. The thing about humans, Rodriguez continued conversationally as his ship obliterated another cruiser, is that we're really good at learning from our mistakes. And our biggest mistake? We almost destroyed ourselves through warfare before we learned to work together. But once we figured out cooperation, well, turns out we're even better at making war than we are at making peace. Kethavar watched 60 more fighters disappear in a coordinated strike by 3 human vessels. The precision was incredible. Not one shot was wasted, not one movement unnecessary. It was like watching a perfectly choreographed performance. Status report, he demanded. Tilmar's crystalline form was flickering with stress patterns. Sir, we've lost 137 vessels. Damage reports are coming in from every remaining ship. The humans haven't lost a single vessel. That's impossible. Sir, our weapons aren't even scratching their hulls. It's like they're made of something that doesn't exist in normal space. A new horror was dawning on Kethavar. Not only were the human ships impossibly fast and heavily armed, they appeared to be completely invulnerable to Dominion weapons. Every plasma beam, every particle cannon, every quantum torpedo simply passed through them as if they weren't there. Sir, sensor operator Yindal called out urgently. New contacts approaching from the direction of their home world. Multiple massive signatures. The tactical display updated to show what was coming, and Kethavar felt his legs go weak. 3 enormous vessels were approaching, each one larger than his flagship. But size wasn't what made them terrifying. It was what they were doing to space around them. Reality itself was warping in their wake. Stars flickered and dimmed as they passed. The very fabric of space-time seemed to ripple outward from their hulls like water around swimming predators. My God, whispered Navigator Yindal in her native tongue. What have they built? A new transmission came through, this one from the lead massive vessel. The voice was older, calmer, but somehow infinitely more threatening than the enthusiastic pilots of the smaller ships. This is Admiral Sarah Chen aboard the UEF Prometheus. I believe we've met before, Admiral Kethavar. I wanted to give you one final opportunity to surrender and withdraw from our system. Kethavar found his voice, though it came out rougher than he intended. You know who I am? Oh, we know exactly who you are. We've been studying your tactics for months. We know about the 17 worlds you've conquered, the species you've enslaved, the billions you've killed. Chen's voice grew colder. We know everything about the Galactic Dominion and its methods. The massive human vessels were close enough now for detailed scans. What the sensors revealed defied comprehension. The ships weren't just large, they were impossible. Their hulls seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and the energy readings coming from their cores suggested power sources that could fuel entire star systems. Surrender is not an option, Kethavar replied with more confidence than he felt. The Dominion does not retreat. I thought you might say that. Chen's voice carried what almost sounded like sadness. That's unfortunate. You see, Admiral, we humans have been studying warfare for thousands of years. We've perfected every form of violence our minds can conceive. We've turned destruction into an art form. The Prometheus began to charge weapons that registered energy levels beyond anything in the Dominion's experience. But the most important thing we learned, Chen continued, is that sometimes, to save the things you love, you have to become the monster, and we've become very, very good monsters. The massive human vessel fired. What emerged wasn't a weapon in any sense that Kethvar understood. It was concentrated entropy, raw chaos given form and direction. Where it struck the Dominion fleet, ships didn't just die. They ceased to exist, not destroyed or vaporized, but erased from reality as if they had never been built at all. Kethvar watched a full squadron of his finest warships simply fade away, leaving not even wreckage behind. And in that moment, he finally understood what he was truly facing. These weren't primitive beings with crude weapons. These were the inheritors of a world that had tried to kill them every day for millions of years. They were the descendants of survivors who had learned to turn the very forces of nature into tools of war. They were humanity. And they had come to show the galaxy what real monsters looked like. Admiral Kethvar's flagship shuddered as another wave of impossible energy washed over his dying fleet. In the space of 30 minutes, 3 centuries of Dominion naval superiority had been reduced to burning wreckage and screaming voices over the communications channels. His 500 proud warships had been cut down to fewer than 50, and those survivors were barely functional. "Sir, the dreadnought Eternal Victory has been completely destroyed," reported Zareth, his voice breaking. "No survivors." Kethvar closed all 4 of his eyes. The Eternal Victory had carried a crew of 12,000 beings. 12,000 souls who had believed in the Dominion's invincibility, who had trusted in his leadership. Now they were nothing more than expanding clouds of superheated gas. "Admiral," General Vexthul approached with 3 of his 6 arms hanging limp, damaged in the last attack. "We must retreat. This isn't a battle anymore. This is an execution." The word retreat hung in the air like a curse. Kethvar had built his entire identity around the concept of inevitable victory. The Galactic Dominion didn't lose, couldn't lose. They were the apex predators of space, the inheritors of 1,000 conquered worlds, but the humans were teaching them a very different lesson. "Sir, incoming transmission from the human flagship," Zareth announced. On screen, Admiral Sarah Chen's face appeared, and Kethvar was struck by how ordinary she looked. No fangs, no claws, no obvious signs of predatory evolution, just a middle-aged human female with graying hair and tired eyes. She could have been anyone's grandmother, if not for the fact that she had just orchestrated the destruction of the most powerful fleet in the galaxy. "Admiral Kethvar," she said calmly, "I'm going to make this simple for you. You have approximately 40 ships left. My fleet has taken 0 casualties. You can continue this fight and watch the rest of your people die, or you can surrender and we can discuss terms." Kethvar's pride flared. "The Dominion does not negotiate with primitives." Something changed in Chen's expression. The tired grandmother disappeared, replaced by something that made Kethvar's blood run cold. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Admiral, let me tell you about primitives. Primitives are species that haven't learned the fundamental truth about warfare. Would you like to know what that truth is?" Despite himself, Kethvar found himself leaning forward. "The truth is that the side willing to go furthest, to sacrifice everything, to become the most terrible version of themselves, that side wins. Always." Chen's eyes seemed to look directly through the screen into Kethvar's soul. "The question you need to ask yourself is, how far are you willing to go? Because I can promise you we're willing to go much, much further." To emphasize her point, one of the smaller human vessels suddenly accelerated toward the wreckage of a destroyed Dominion cruiser. Instead of simply flying past it, the ship began to glow with the same twisted energy that had been erasing his vessels. The wreckage didn't just get vaporized. It got unmade, removed from the universe so completely that even the background radiation signature disappeared. "We call that our entropy lance," Chen explained casually. "It took us 60 years to develop after we discovered the theoretical framework. Basically, it convinces matter that it never existed in the first place. Very effective but extremely power-intensive. We can only fire it a few dozen times per engagement." Kethvar felt his mouth go dry. A few dozen times? They had just demonstrated enough firepower to erase entire fleets, and they were treating it like a limited resource that they had to conserve. But that's just our ship-to-ship weapons, Chen continued. Would you like to see our planetary siege equipment? Before Kethvar could respond, the massive human vessel Prometheus began to power up something new. The energy readings were beyond anything his sensors could properly measure. Space itself began to bend and warp around the ship's hull, and stars visible in the background started to flicker and dim. This is what we call a stellar tap, Chen explained with the same casual tone one might use to describe kitchen appliances. It draws power directly from your home star to charge our main weapon systems. The advantage is virtually unlimited firepower. The disadvantage is that it tends to destabilize stellar fusion reactions. Kethvar's sensor officer looked up with horror in his crystalline features. Sir, they're drawing energy directly from the system's primary star. If they destabilize it, every planet in this system dies, Kethvar finished. Including their own world, Chen nodded. Exactly. That's the difference between you and us, Admiral. You fight to conquer. We fight to survive. And when survival is on the line, there are no limits to what humans will do. The implications hit Kethvar like a physical blow. The humans weren't just willing to die defending their world. They were willing to destroy their own star system, rather than let it fall into enemy hands. They would commit genocide against themselves before accepting defeat. You're insane, he whispered. No, Chen replied calmly. We're experienced. Do you know how many times our species almost went extinct before we learned to work together? Do you know how many different ways we developed to kill not just our enemies but ourselves? We are very, very good at dying, Admiral. The question is, are you? A new tactical alert appeared on Kethvar's screens. More human ships were approaching from deeper in the system. Not dozens this time, but hundreds. The entire human fleet was converging on his position, and every vessel registered the same impossible energy signatures as the ones that had already destroyed most of his force. Sir? Tilmar's voice was barely a whisper. There are over 800 human vessels approaching. All of them are equipped with the same weapon systems we've encountered. 800 ships, each one capable of single-handedly destroying a Dominion fleet. And they were all coming to finish what the first 48 had started. You wanted to conquer humanity, Chen said, and now Kethvar could hear something like pity in her voice. But you made a fundamental error in judgment. You assumed we were like every other species you've encountered. You thought we would surrender when faced with overwhelming force. The human fleet was visible now as points of light against the darkness, each one moving with the same deadly grace that had torn his formation apart. The thing is, Admiral, humans don't surrender. We adapt, we learn, we improve. And when we're backed into a corner with no way out, we don't just fight back. We become the thing that our enemies have nightmares about. Kethvar looked around his bridge at the faces of his surviving officers. He saw the same expression on all of them that he felt on his own features. For the first time in their species' recorded history, the Zephyrians were experiencing true, soul-deep terror. So I'll ask you one more time, Chen continued as her fleet moved into firing positions around the remnants of his force. Would you like to surrender? Or would you prefer to discover exactly how creative humans can be when it comes to removing threats to our existence? For the first time in his 3-century military career, Admiral Kethvar found himself seriously considering the impossible. He was thinking about surrender. The word stuck in Kethvar's throat like a bone. Surrender. It was a concept so foreign to the Zephyrian military tradition that they barely had a word for it in their language. The closest translation meant temporary tactical disadvantage, which assumed you would eventually resume fighting once circumstances improved. But looking at the tactical display, Kethvar realized that circumstances were not going to improve. Ever. The human fleet had completely surrounded his remaining vessels. 800 ships moved in perfect coordination, their impossible weapons trained on the 43 survivors of what had once been the pride of the Galactic Dominion. Each human vessel alone could have destroyed his entire remaining force. Admiral, whispered General Vexthul, what are your orders? Kethvar stared at the display, his 4 hands gripping the command console so hard that his claws left deep scratches in the metal. Everything he had believed about warfare, about power, about the natural order of the universe lay in burning ruins around him. Sir, the human admiral is waiting for a response, Zareth reported quietly. On the screen, Admiral Chen watched him with those deceptively gentle eyes. But Kethavar could see something else there now. Patience. The kind of infinite patience that comes from absolute certainty about the outcome. If I surrender, Kethavar heard himself say, the words feeling like acid in his mouth. What happens to my crews? Chen's expression softened slightly. They go home. All of them. We'll provide medical care for the wounded and safe passage back to Dominion space for everyone who wants to leave. And the ships? Destroyed. We can't allow Dominion military technology to return to your space. But the crews live. Kethavar felt something break inside his chest. Not his heart's, but something deeper. Something that had defined him since he was a young officer dreaming of conquest among the stars. Sir, Tilmar spoke up hesitantly. There's something else. Long-range sensors are detecting multiple warp signatures approaching from Dominion space. It looks like reinforcements. For a moment, hope flared in Kethavar's chest. Perhaps this nightmare could still be salvaged. Perhaps how many ships? Admiral Chen asked calmly, apparently monitoring their communications. The signatures suggest approximately 2,000 vessels, including the entire 4th and 7th battle fleets. Chen nodded as if this was exactly what she had expected. Admiral Kethavar, I appreciate the Dominion's commitment to this engagement, but you should know that additional forces won't change the outcome. Would you like to see why? Before he could respond, the tactical display shifted to show a wider view of the Sol system. What Kethavar saw made his blood turn to ice water. The humans hadn't just built a fleet. They had militarized their entire star system. Massive orbital installations surrounded every planet and major asteroid. Space stations the size of moons bristled with weapons that registered energy outputs comparable to small stars. Even the system's asteroid belt had been transformed into a network of automated defense platforms. But that wasn't the worst part. Those installations you're looking at, Chen explained casually, are just the visible components. The real defense grid exists in what we call folded space. Essentially, we've learned to hide weapons installations in pocket dimensions that intersect with normal space only when we want them to. As if responding to her words, the space around the approaching Dominion reinforcements began to shimmer. Thousands of new contacts appeared from nowhere, weapons already charged and targeting solutions locked. We've had 3 years to prepare for this, Admiral. 3 years to turn our entire system into the most elaborate death trap ever conceived. Your reinforcement fleets are entering an engagement zone where we outnumber them 50-1. Kethavar watched in horror as the trap unfolded. The approaching Dominion fleets, confident in their overwhelming numbers, suddenly found themselves facing odds that made victory impossible. But unlike his own engagement, this wasn't even going to be a fight. It was going to be a massacre. Stop, he said quietly. I'm sorry, Admiral. Stop. His voice was stronger now, carrying across the bridge. I surrender. Unconditionally call off your attack on the reinforcements. Chen studied him for a long moment. You understand that surrender means the complete withdrawal of all Dominion forces from this system? No return engagements, no revenge fleets, no attempts to reclaim what you've lost here. I understand. And you understand that you'll be required to carry a message back to your high command about what happened here? About what humans are capable of when threatened? Kethavar nodded slowly. I understand. Chen's expression softened further, and for a moment she looked like the grandmother he had first taken her for. Admiral, I want you to know that I take no pleasure in this. My species learned a long time ago that violence should always be the last resort, never the first choice. But we also learned that when violence becomes necessary, it should be swift, overwhelming, and absolute. The human weapons powered down, all around the system. The death trap that had been ready to annihilate 2,000 Dominion warships simply vanished back into whatever impossible dimensions it had emerged from. You'll be escorted to the edge of the system and released, Chen continued. Medical ships are already en route to assist your wounded. And Admiral, yes, when you report back to your superiors, make sure they understand something important. Today you faced only our local defense fleet. Our actual military is currently deployed in deep space, protecting our colonies and trade routes. What you encountered here represents perhaps 5% of our total military capability. The words hit Kethavar like a physical blow. 5%. The force that had effortlessly destroyed the most powerful fleet in the galaxy was just a small fraction of humanity's true strength. Why are you telling me this? He asked. Chen's smile was gentle, but her eyes remained cold as the void between stars. Because, Admiral, We want the Galactic Dominion to make an informed decision about whether they want to continue testing our patients. We're hoping wisdom will prevail over pride." The transmission ended, leaving Kethvar alone with his thoughts and the weight of absolute defeat. Around him, his bridge crew worked quietly to coordinate the surrender protocols. No one spoke. No one looked at him directly. They all understood what had happened here. They had encountered something new in the galaxy, something that challenged every assumption about power, about warfare, about the natural order of things. They had met a species that had turned survival into an art form, and destruction into a science. They had met humanity, and humanity had taught them the meaning of fear. As human medical ships approached to tend to their wounded and human escorts moved into position to guide them home, Kethvar found himself wondering about the report he would have to write. How do you explain to the High Command that everything they believed about their own supremacy was wrong? How do you convince the most powerful military force in the galaxy that they had just encountered something even more powerful? How do you tell apex predators that they had just met something that made them prey? The journey back to Dominion space took 12 days. 12 days of silence, of broken pride, and of growing dread about the reception waiting for him at High Command. Kethvar spent most of the time in his quarters, staring out at the stars and trying to process what had happened. The humans had kept their word completely. Medical ships had arrived within hours, staffed by human doctors who worked tirelessly to save Dominion wounded, without regard for species or rank. They had been professional, efficient, and strangely compassionate. The wounded soldiers they treated spoke of human medics who stayed by their bedsides, who learned enough of their languages to offer comfort, who genuinely seemed to care about the welfare of their former enemies. It was another piece of the puzzle that Kethvar couldn't fit into his understanding of the universe. How could a species be so utterly ruthless in battle yet so caring toward the defeated? How could they build weapons that unmade matter itself, while simultaneously developing medical technology that could heal wounds his own doctors considered fatal? The escort ships that guided them to the edge of human space were equally mysterious. They maintained perfect formation and constant vigilance, but their crews occasionally transmitted messages of encouragement or offers of additional assistance. It was as if they viewed the Dominion survivors not as conquered enemies, but as fellow beings who had simply found themselves on the wrong side of an unfortunate conflict. Admiral, General Vexthal approached him on the final day of the journey, his insectoid features still showing signs of the injuries he had sustained. "We'll be arriving at Nexus Station in 6 hours. Have you decided how to present your report?" Kethvar looked up from the data pad where he had been trying for days to compose a coherent explanation of their defeat. "How do you report the impossible, General? How do you explain to the High Command that everything we thought we knew about warfare is wrong?" "Perhaps," Vexthal suggested carefully, "we should focus on the technological advantages the humans displayed. Frame it as an intelligence failure rather than a military one." "No." Kethvar's voice was firm. "That would be a lie, and lies won't help the Dominion survive what's coming." "What do you mean?" Kethvar gestured toward the viewport where Dominion space lay ahead of them. "Do you really think this ends here? Do you think the High Command will accept that the mighty Galactic Dominion was defeated by a single species that we dismissed as primitive? They'll want revenge. They'll mass the entire Grand Fleet and launch a war of extermination against humanity." Vexthal's mandibles clicked nervously. "Surely they wouldn't risk—" "They would. They will. And when they do, Admiral Chen and her people will do exactly what they promised. They'll show the galaxy what real monsters look like." The weight of that realization had been growing on Kethvar throughout the journey home. The humans hadn't just defeated his fleet. They had revealed themselves as an existential threat to every military force in the galaxy. The Dominion's only options were to leave humanity alone completely or face the possibility of total annihilation. Pride would never allow the first option, which meant the second was inevitable. Nexus Station appeared on their sensors right on schedule, a massive orbital facility that served as the administrative center for the entire Dominion military. Kethvar had departed from here just 2 weeks ago with confidence, authority, and the finest fleet under his command. Now he was returning with barely 50 ships and news that would shake the foundations of Dominion power. "Incoming transmission from Nexus Control," reported Communications Officer Zareth. "They're requesting permission to come alongside for immediate transfer to High Command." "Granted," Kethvar replied. He had known this moment would come, but he still felt unprepared for it. Within an hour, He found himself standing in the High Command chamber, facing the 12-member Council of Admirals that governed all Dominion military operations. These were beings from different species across the galaxy, united only by their belief in the superiority of Dominion arms and their commitment to endless expansion. Supreme Admiral Kralthar, a massive reptilian being from the core world, spoke first. Admiral Kethvar, your mission report indicates a tactical withdrawal due to unexpected human capabilities. Explain. Kethvar had rehearsed this moment during the journey home, but standing here now, facing the concentrated authority of the galaxy's most powerful military force, he found his planned words inadequate. Supreme Admiral, the humans are not what our intelligence report suggested. They are not a primitive species with crude technology. They are possibly the most dangerous military force this galaxy has ever seen. A ripple of dismissive sounds ran around the chamber. Admiral Vexkol, a crystalline being whose species had been among the Dominion's first conquests, spoke up sharply. Explain how a single species defeated 500 of our finest warships. They have developed weapons technology that operates outside known physics, Kethvar replied. They can accelerate to near light speed in normal space, create localized gravitational anomalies, and deploy weapons that erase matter from existence. But more importantly, they have weaponized their entire star system and possess military doctrine based on total warfare. Total warfare? Supreme Admiral Kralthar leaned forward. They are willing to destroy their own home star rather than accept defeat. They view warfare not as conquest, but as survival. There are no limits to what they will do, no weapons they will not use, no sacrifices they will not make. Kethvar paused, letting the implications sink in. They offered to demonstrate their planetary siege weapons by destabilizing their own sun. The chamber fell silent. Finally, Admiral Morden, an ancient being whose species had conquered hundreds of worlds, spoke in a voice like grinding stone. You're suggesting that a single species poses a threat to the entire Dominion? I'm suggesting that this species represents a fundamental shift in the galactic balance of power. They don't fight to conquer, they fight to survive, and they have developed the technology to make survival mean the extinction of anyone who threatens them. Supreme Admiral Kralthar stood, his massive frame dominating the chamber. Unacceptable. The Dominion does not retreat from inferior species. We will assemble the Grand Fleet. Every available vessel will participate in a campaign of total extermination against these humans. Sir, Kethvar said desperately, that would be exactly what they're expecting. They want us to mass our forces against them. It will allow them to demonstrate their full capabilities to the entire galaxy. Let them demonstrate, Kralthar replied coldly. When the Grand Fleet reduces their worlds to cosmic dust, the galaxy will remember that the Dominion cannot be challenged. Kethvar felt a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's temperature. Supreme Admiral, with respect, I don't think you understand. The force that defeated my fleet was only their local defense units. Admiral Chen specifically stated that it represented 5% of their total military capability. 5%? Admiral Vexkol's crystalline form flickered with disbelief. If that's true, Kethvar continued, then their full military could potentially engage and defeat the entire Grand Fleet. But that's not even the worst possibility. Explain. Kethvar took a deep breath, knowing that what he was about to say would probably end his career. The worst possibility is that they're not alone. The humans mentioned allies in something called the Confederation of Free Worlds. If they've shared their technology with other species, if they've been preparing other worlds the same way they prepared their own system. He didn't need to finish the sentence. The implications were clear to everyone in the chamber. You're dismissed, Admiral, Supreme Admiral Kralthar said coldly. Report to debriefing for full tactical analysis. The Grand Fleet will be assembled within the month. As Kethvar left the chamber, he felt the weight of inevitable doom settling on his shoulders. The Dominion was going to war with humanity, and based on what he had seen, that war was going to teach the galaxy a lesson that would echo through the stars for generations. Humanity was about to show everyone what happened when apex predators met, something even more dangerous than themselves. 3 months later, Admiral Kethvar stood on the observation deck of his new command ship, watching the largest military armada in galactic history prepare for what High Command was calling the final solution to the human problem. 20,000 warships from across the Dominion, stretched as far as sensors could reach, representing the combined might of over 100 subjugated species. The Grand Fleet was magnificent and terrible, a constellation of death that had never been matched in the galaxy's recorded history. Dreadnoughts the size of small moons sailed alongside carrier vessels packed with fighter craft. Superweapons platforms carried planet-killer devices that could crack worlds in half. The assembled firepower could have exterminated entire star systems. But Kethvar felt only dread. Impressive sight, isn't it? Supreme Admiral Kralthar approached, his reptilian features displaying the satisfaction of a predator about to feed. The humans will learn the price of challenging Dominion authority. Yes, sir, Kethvar replied, though his voice lacked conviction. Over the past months, he had been transferred to a minor command position aboard a support vessel, officially due to the tactical errors that had led to his defeat at Sol. Unofficially, everyone knew it was because High Command didn't want his pessimistic assessments affecting fleet morale. Long-range sensors report that we'll reach the human system in 6 hours, Kralthar continued. Our intelligence operatives have confirmed that they're preparing defenses, but nothing that could possibly stand against this force. Kethvar said nothing. The intelligence reports had indeed confirmed human military activity, but they had also noted something troubling. Several major human colony worlds had gone completely dark over the past month, their populations apparently evacuated to unknown locations. It suggested preparation for something far more extensive than local defense. Sir, interrupted communications specialist Yelnath, a nervous aquatic being from one of the newer Dominion territories. We're receiving a transmission from the human system. It's addressed to Supreme Admiral Kralthar personally. On screen, Admiral Sarah Chen's face appeared, looking exactly as she had 3 months ago when she had accepted Kethvar's surrender. Calm, professional, and somehow infinitely dangerous. Supreme Admiral Kralthar, she began without preamble. I'm Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Earth Defense Force. I wanted to personally thank you for giving us the time we needed to complete our preparations. Kralthar's massive jaw dropped open slightly. Preparations? Oh yes. We've been quite busy since Admiral Kethvar's visit. We've had time to fully integrate our new allies into our defense network, deploy our deep space assets, and activate some projects that we weren't quite ready to reveal during our first encounter. On the tactical display, new contacts began appearing throughout the Sol system, lots of them. The numbers climbed steadily as sensors detected more and more human vessels, until the count exceeded 10,000 ships, but that wasn't what made Kethvar's blood run cold. Sir, the sensor operator reported in a shaking voice, those aren't all human ships. We're detecting vessel configurations from at least 30 different species, including several that match Confederation of Free Worlds designs. Chen smiled on screen. Allow me to introduce our friends. The Confederation was very interested in our defensive technologies, and we were equally interested in their manufacturing capabilities. It's amazing what you can accomplish when you combine human innovation with the industrial resources of 60 different worlds. The count on the tactical display continued climbing. 15,000, 20,000, 25,000. But that's still not the most important development, Chen continued conversationally. The really significant news is that we've been in contact with several species within Dominion territory. It seems that not everyone is happy with your empire's management style. As if summoned by her words, new warp signatures began appearing at the edges of the battle space. Ships bearing the markings of a dozen different Dominion member species dropped out of warp and immediately began targeting Dominion vessels. Rebellion, Kralthar roared. Impossible. Actually, it's quite possible when you give oppressed peoples hope, Chen replied calmly. We've been sharing our defensive technologies with any species willing to stand up to Dominion tyranny. Turns out there were quite a few volunteers. Kethvar watched the tactical display with growing horror as the trap revealed its full scope. The Grand Fleet hadn't sailed into a battle. They had sailed into a coordinated uprising involving half the galaxy. Dominion member species that had been conquered centuries ago were revealing hidden fleets, weapons that had been secretly developed, and alliances that had been building in shadow for generations. This is all very impressive, Kralthar said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. But you still face the finest military force in the galaxy. Numbers alone won't save you, Chen's smile widened. You're absolutely right. Numbers alone wouldn't be enough. That's why we didn't rely on numbers alone. The space around the human fleet began to shimmer, and Kethvar felt his heart stop. He recognized that distortion pattern. It was the same signature that had preceded the appearance of the human weapons platforms during his defeat. But this time, the scale was incomprehensible. Weapons platforms began materializing from folded space, not dozens or hundreds, but thousands upon thousands. Each one registered energy outputs that dwarfed the most powerful Dominion dreadnoughts. They formed a sphere around the Grand Fleet that stretched for light minutes in every direction. We call this the Terran Defense Grid, Chen explained as more and more platforms continued to appear. It took us 3 months to position everything correctly, but we're finally ready to give you the demonstration you requested. This is impossible, Kralthar whispered. No species could build this much infrastructure in 3 months. You're right, Chen agreed. No single species could. But when 40 different civilizations work together, sharing resources and knowledge, you'd be amazed what becomes possible, especially when those civilizations are motivated by the desire to never again bow to tyranny. The platforms were fully deployed now, and Kethvar realized that the Grand Fleet was completely trapped. 20,000 of the most powerful warships ever built were sitting motionless in the center of a weapon system that could probably destroy entire solar systems. Now, Chen continued, I'm going to offer you the same choice I offered Admiral Kethvar. Surrender. Withdraw from this system and we can discuss terms for a peaceful resolution to this conflict. Continue fighting and you'll discover exactly how far human engineering has advanced since our last meeting. Kralthar looked around the bridge, seeing the same expression on every face that Kethvar had seen on his own bridge 3 months ago. Raw, absolute terror. You're bluffing, the Supreme Admiral said finally. You wouldn't risk destroying your own system. Admiral Kethvar thought the same thing, Chen replied pleasantly. Would you like me to demonstrate our commitment? One of the massive weapons platforms began to charge. The energy readings were beyond anything Kethvar had ever seen, approaching levels that suggested the device was drawing power directly from subspace itself. That platform, Chen explained, is aimed at an uninhabited asteroid approximately 1 million kilometers from your current position. It's roughly the size of a small moon. Watch carefully. The weapon fired. What emerged wasn't a beam or a projectile. It was a tear in reality itself. A wound in space-time that reached across impossible distances and simply erased the target asteroid from existence. Not vaporized or destroyed, but removed so completely that even the gravitational signature disappeared. We have 17,000 more platforms just like that one, Chen said into the absolute silence that followed. Each one capable of firing once every 30 seconds. Do the math, Supreme Admiral. Kethvar did the math. The human defense grid could delete the entire Grand Fleet from existence in less than 2 minutes. 20,000 warships, millions of crew members, the pride and power of a galactic empire, all erased as if they had never existed. I'll ask you one final time, Chen continued. Surrender or discover what happens when you threaten a species that learned to survive by becoming the deadliest force in their galaxy. For a long moment, the only sound in the command center was the hum of life support systems. Then slowly, Supreme Admiral Kralthar raised his hands in the universal gesture of surrender. The Galactic Dominion surrenders, he said, in a voice barely above a whisper. Wise choice, Chen replied. Admiral Kethvar, if you're monitoring this transmission, please report to the forward communications array. We have a proposition for you. An hour later, Kethvar found himself once again facing Admiral Chen, though this time the conversation was taking place aboard a human vessel. The ship's interior was surprisingly comfortable, designed for beings from multiple species rather than just humans. Admiral, Chen said, gesturing for him to sit, I wanted to speak with you personally because you're the only Dominion officer who truly understands what happened here today. I understand that my empire just lost a war without firing a shot. Kethvar replied bitterly. Not lost, Chen Si.